There have been engineers, right, that have been working for the organization 10, 15 plus years. These engineers were extremely successful in the data center, and moving to the cloud, they basically have to completely retrain, right? So if you had a noisy communication protocol, then you may saturate your data transfer charges in the cloud. If you are optimizing for sustainability, you also often optimize for cost. Before you design your solution, start thinking about cost. So cost on the timeline is being positioned early on at the beginning of the design, not like once the design is done, you try to make it cost efficient, right?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of our podcast. Today we are having Dieter. Welcome, Dieter.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So it's going to be a wonderful interview, and of course, we have our co-host Damian. How are you, Damian?
I'm fine. I'm very good. Thank you. It's always
So
a pleasure.
yeah, thanks for being both of you here. Yeah, Damian, let's introduce our guest here.
Hey guys,
So,
I'm Dieter Mason. I have been working in the cloud since 2013 at companies like Google, Netflix, Intuit, and most recently Roku. I'm also one of the FinOps ambassadors.
excellent, excellent. It's good to have you here with us. We were very impressed. We look at your site, and one of the things that just immediately pop up is about the FinOps ambassador, and we have to ask, how someone can become a FinOps ambassador.
I think you need to be volunteered by the foundation. It is not something that you can actively achieve, right? You do a lot of outreach, a lot of public speaking, those kind of things. I know the founder, J.R. Storment, since 2016, well before the founding of the foundation. And in 2016 at reInvent, JR asked me the question, hey, does this cloud financial management have legs? And I said, it's like an industrial kitchen where you have, 6, 8 cooks. And so it has to be cleaned up every day, right? And that applies to the cloud, right? You just don't never finish, If engineers do work, engineers create waste, create anomalies, create challenges, forecasting, and so it's an ongoing effort.
And after you got the title, is anything else that you do that you must do, or?
There's a couple of responsibilities, yes. So first of all, you have to be a certified FinOps practitioner, right, to become an ambassador. So, and in addition, there are ambassador meetings that we have on a monthly basis, right? And there's different regions. We just had the North America ambassador meeting, but there's also like a global ambassador meeting. And doing that, the foundation shares information, and they may have projects for which they are looking for volunteers, right? And then the ambassadors can volunteer for those and drive these efforts.
Interesting,
That's
interesting.
interesting.
So also we look into your your site also. We also noticed that you were one of the people that were doing FinOps. I think even before it was called FinOps, right? You were like kind of
Correct.
an early day promoter of financial reductions or optimizations. So how was it in those days?
Yeah, I mean, when I left PayPal and I interviewed at various companies, right, I saw there's a bunch of positions open at Google. And I said, like, hey, what's the worst that can happen, right? They tell me no, right? So I applied for a Google position, and Google has an interesting hiring process where they have queues, where you don't actually meet your manager. The queue is completely anonymously interviewed, and then you get, in a sense, randomly assigned to a job that requires that role, right, for which you interviewed. I had the fortune where I was able to meet my future manager briefly. And so when I started working at Google, they realized that their public cloud offering is growing faster, then they can build data centers, right? Data centers typically is like a 2-year effort. And so they were looking for internal inefficiencies that they could carve out and assign to the public cloud.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And so I'm curious about like how was the transition from that you now that you mentioned about the data centers, have you seen the transition from doing FinOps or doing finance related stuff from data centers to what you are doing now in the public cloud?
Yeah, I mean, public cloud, to be honest, is everything is new, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you knew before, in the data center, we do capacity management, right? Where we are looking at 3 to 5 year forecasts, and then we procure hardware. And the hardware is intentionally over provisioned so that the workloads can grow into the hardware over the amortization period, right? Of the 3, 4, or 5 years, whatever that period is. And so, for example, at Intuit, we migrated from 26 data centers all into Amazon Web Services public cloud, right? And there have been engineers, right, that have been working for the organization 10, 15 plus years and were extremely successful, right? There are products like TurboTax or QuickBooks that are, my CPA
Yeah.
is using QuickBooks, right? My accountant is using QuickBooks. So these engineers were extremely successful in the data center, and moving to the cloud, they basically have to completely retrain, right? They start fresh. So one thing that we did notice is after the lift and shift migration, we had 24% waste in the cloud, right? And we used 6 waste sensors to determine that. Waste sensors are like little scripts that collect information and store it in a central repository where it then can be surfaced by engineering owner or business owner. And over the course of 4 years, we got the waste down from 24% to under 5%. And we increased the waste sensors from 6 to 34. So we sort of raised the bar, and at the same time, we drove the cloud waste down.
No, that's really interesting. So you basically made a waste detect and automate in-house waste detector for you, and now you are making increasing, let's say, the suite of capabilities for that, and that's super
Exactly.
super interesting. And so now that you mentioned that, the migration that happened on this topic is that now that there is this trend or this debate about the repatriation stuff, so going back to on premises because of the cost of the cloud is too high. What are your thoughts on this topic and on this trend that is going on?
There are a couple of use cases where that may make sense, right? And as an ambassador, I do a lot of outreach, right? Where I go and talk to a lot of people, typically multiple organizations every week, right? And there are some organizations that were able to move cloud workloads back into a data center quite successfully, but those were niche workloads. Dropbox being one of those examples that moved from the simple storage service on AWS to their own storage solution in a data center, which they can manage more efficiently. When you think about it, the cloud is a managed service. AWS has over 175 products, right? And all these products are managed, right? Someone else is carrying the pager when something goes wrong. And so that comes at a cost. Now, economies of scale can reduce the cost, right? Because AWS has dozens of data centers with hundreds of thousands of virtual machines, so they can reduce the cost. But overall, I think there is sort of like a 20% premium if you compare like for like in a data center to the cloud, and that is the management overhead, right? However, I also consult with Hennepin County in Minnesota. And they found that certain technologies would be very challenging to implement in the data center, specifically text-to-speech or speech-to-text. Those kind of things, building that in a data center would take years. And in the cloud, it's just a product, right? You just use the product and it works for the most part, right? So the elasticity of the cloud has benefits, right? If, for example, TurboTax, the United States has one tax day, which is April 15th, right? And for some reason, people, they sort of file the taxes a couple of days before, right? You can file them anytime after like February, right? Because this is when your tax records come in, employee and those kind of things, right? So you can file them anytime, but most people like file them, 1-2 days or on tax day, right? So Intuit had this huge problem that they needed to have the data center capacity for the tax day. And then the rest of the year, this was unused, right? And in the cloud, you can simply scale up maybe 2 weeks before tax day, right? And then you're ready, you have the capacity. And then after tax day, you can release that capacity, which also means that you are not going to be billed. So that elasticity has the benefit that you can scale up, but it also has, in a sense, the opportunity that if something is unused, you need to turn it off. Otherwise, you still incur a cost.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's super interesting. And yeah, it's a great reflection that because I don't recall when we were talking, Damian, about this regarding like load testing and peak kind of things for example, retailers like with these Black Fridays, Christmas events, and this is something that definitely needs to be evaluated before considering a repatriation.
This is an interesting example. First time I think we talk about taxes and
Yeah.
first of all, nobody wants to
And it's
pay.
interesting.
Of course, they will leave it to the last day. But yes, elasticity is a good example of how the cloud can help you. And of course, if you want to move that into the on-prem, of course, always need the hardware to be supporting on your top on the worst performance, let's say, right? So you're wasting a lot of money. And of course, I think the on-premise we talk in this show several times about the clarity that the cloud offers you, and I'm not sure you can even get to the point of that clarity on the cost clarity, right? On-premise. There's a lot of ways that you don't know, right?
Yeah, and there's also surprises, right? When you have an on-premise workload, the data transfer is free, right? But you move into the cloud, all of a sudden you need to pay for the data transfer. So if you had a noisy communication protocol, then you may saturate your data transfer charges in the cloud. And that is a common thing that I see when people migrate, that they sort of forget about certain things, right? Some of the virtual machines, they don't come with storage, with disk storage, right? Or virtual disk storage. So you buy the virtual machine, but you can't run an operating system on it because it does not have ephemeral storage. So you need to attach elastic block storage, and that has also an additional cost, right? So that is another common mistake that I see that engineers do when they size workloads in the cloud, right? That they forget those things.
Yeah. Moving on to that topic, like, what are your recommendations when you have to do an exercise of sizing workloads in the cloud? Like, what do you recommend? Because I'm sure you have done a lot of sizing and estimation exercises. So what are your main recommendations for doing that kind of things?
That may sound weird, but one of the best things to get your engineers to provide high quality work or deliverables in the cloud is to ask for a certain percentage of your engineers to be certified. It gets, at Intuit, we had a mandate that 50% of the engineers need to get any AWS certification, right? It doesn't matter if it was professional, associate, specialist, or those kind of things, right? Just because, once you have enough certified engineers in the team, it will cross-pollinate, right? an uncertified team member can ask the certified team member for advice, right? And it's really the knowledge that is driving the quality of the work, in my experience, right? And it sounds a little bit barbaric that you just mandate 50% get certified, right? But it helps the engineers, right? They are more employable with their next employer, right? And they are able to help, and they know when they need help, right? And all these cloud vendors, maybe except for Azure, right? They are very welcoming to provide solution architects for projects, right? Have that person sit with your team for like 2, 3 weeks and provide advice and insights into best practices, well-architected framework, and those kind of things.
That's very interesting. I haven't thought about that on because in my company there is definitely some incentives on do that. I know that there are companies that even give bonuses to people that get certified. So there are different programs that are interesting in that topic.
No,
Yeah, bonuses is definitely better than layoffs.
No, for sure. For sure.
Definitely. Also, I, it might be when I was learning and learning, all the time there are new things, and when you do the certificates or recertifications, you always found out there were new things that are going on, and new optimization or another key features that might help you in optimizing or helping the workflow, not only on the economic level, but also on the efficiency, right? When you work efficient, in any case, you know, the pillars, any pillars that you choose will help you eventually economically.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where well-architected comes into play, right? Every cloud vendor has something that provides best practices and guidelines on how to work in the cloud, how to build things in the cloud.
Totally. And regarding this skill set or this training and educational level, what do you think are the skills or the education that someone can get to become a good FinOps practitioner, especially here from the technical perspective, because we here are both coming from the cloud world. But from that side, what are your recommendations on formation and education and skill sets?
You know, that is a very good and interesting question, because the engineers, they know how to write code, right?
Yeah.
And that includes things like even how to use a GitHub or GitLab, right? How to use libraries, right? A lot of the code uses public open source libraries, right? Which are maintained outside of your organization, right? And could have a security risk with them, right?
Yeah.
We just recently had a situation of a Linux compression command line tool that had a vulnerability exposed on purpose, right? So and then the engineers are also familiar with other tools like PagerDuty, for example, right? So that they can integrate with that. And observability tools, right? Like a Datadog, Splunk, New Relic, those kind of things, right? So the engineering skill set is not just really focused on writing code, right? But there's all these other systems that they need to become quite proficient in, right? And I would say that the cloud is yet another system that they have to become proficient in, right? And as I said, there's over 175 products when I checked the last time. And just in Amazon Web Services, the same is true for Google Cloud, the same is true for Azure Cloud, right?
Yeah.
And depending on where that engineer is working, they need to know maybe a dozen, 2 dozen services, and need to be familiar with them quite inside out, right? Quite know the details. So, for example, a virtual machine on AWS works differently from a virtual machine on Google Cloud, right? Google Cloud is much more fungible when it comes to CPU and memory, while AWS has certain slots that you can get, right? And then There's also differences with additional ancillary services, right? Like the simple storage service on AWS and the lifecycle management and then on just Google Storage, cloud storage, right? For example, on the AWS side, when you have an aged out object that is aged to colder, less expensive storage, right? It gets rehydrated into a staging area, right? While on Google Cloud storage, the object is available instantaneously. However, the aging out is a 365-day time period, right? So as you access an older object, it is available within 10, 15 milliseconds. However, you have to pay for it to age out again, right? While on the AWS side, it may take some time to rehydrate, and then it stays within that staging area for 30 days, after which it gets cleaned out. So the engineers really need to understand all those intricacies, right? When you look at Elastic Block Store on the AWS side, there is GP2 and GP3 options, right? Now you can switch between GP2 and GP3. However, many engineers are not aware that there is a cooldown period of 4 hours for switching back. So while the switch is in most cases seamless, right, and it can be done online, you don't have to take the volume offline. If you decide to make any other changes, you need to wait 4 hours before these can be applied. So the engineers really need to understand how these cloud services work, or you will get surprises, right? For example, we had a situation where an engineer used a Terraform script to instantiate a vendor solution. It was in a sense, a SaaS solution that was self-hosted, right? And whenever they had a configuration error, they just tore down the cloud workload and instantiated again. And they did that, 20, 30, 40 times. What they didn't realize is that they started orphaning those Elastic Block Store volumes, those virtual disk volumes, and that kept, because the entire system was supposed to be a SaaS solution. So I think the volume was like 2 terabytes in size. And they had, after a month of trying to install that software, they had like, 160 terabytes of orphaned volumes lying around that they were simply not aware of, because from their point of view, they were just running a Terraform script.
Yeah, they are not dealing with the consequences of doing that. Yeah, definitely.
Exactly.
No, that's an interesting use case, and I do agree that for doing optimizations and for doing FinOps work, you definitely need to know inside out the cloud services. I, for example, and I talk with Damian and with the people that we talk about that, for example, I am much better in GCP than in AWS, and it translates only in the generalistics, like system designs, cloud knowledge a bit. But then when you are actually using the tools, the proficiency that you have on the day-to-day basis is nothing compared when you are used to do a work with a provider all day for every day in your work life. Then, for example, if I now have to switch to AWS on a day-to-day, I will have to stay rolling, and then if I am on GCP, I am super comfortable. I totally agree on that point.
Yeah, agreed. I have the same observation. We actually use all 3 clouds in different proportions. The majority is on AWS, but some of the data engineering workloads are running on Google Cloud, because the data analytics offerings that come out of the box seem to be having more breadth and more depth and higher quality of the features, right? And so the engineers, they have to relearn, right? Instantiating a virtual machine on AWS works a little bit differently from GCP, right? And then and if you go to Azure, you can run something with DTUs. Those are processing units. And something that uses processing units, for example, cannot use a reservation on the Azure side, right? So again, it's different. High level, yes, they are all virtual machines, right? But how they actually work differs from cloud vendor to cloud vendor.
Exactly. It also impacts the automations, right? Because when you're shutting down in AWS, not the same as shutting down in Azure, when you need to deallocate in order to save. And this is a very important topic and a very important item that people need to know. Not only the DevOps, but also the FinOps, right? When they're analyzing all the optimizations that can be done in the automation.
Yeah, for example, a good example here is on the Azure side, if you have a database, right, and let's say you are an organization that only works from like 8 to 6 p.m., right? And you're not really international, you don't really have engineers in other countries working, right? On the Azure side, what you do is you actually reduce the compute units for your database to the point where it is still running, it could still do like one query a minute, right? But it cannot handle the workload at peak. And then in the morning, you basically increase the processing units so that the database is able to handle the daily workloads, right? Which is something that you can't do on AWS or GCP, right? So again, there's differences, substantial differences, and you need to know how to take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, that's what we are also seeing is that coming from the, let's say, FinOps engineering perspective, so people that are used to do like more hands-on optimizations, such as the one that you mentioned about automation, that you actually need to have the cloud knowledge to actually implement those. And that's what we are seeing. Like what we try to do is to increase the content and increase the awareness of that. It needs to be some technical content regarding that, so that people are better in these practices, in being able to how to reduce the compute capabilities automatically from 6 p.m. So you need a script for doing that, and how do you learn to do that script? And that's content that I think it's left to do in the FinOps perspective, but it's something that definitely is worth, especially for like more engineering FinOps perspective.
Yeah, and I agree. This is why I think that certifications are so immensely helpful, right? Because you do get formal training, right? And some of the training that you receive, at least the foundational things, they will stay with you. And then you know what you need to watch out for and where to get more information and when you need to get help, right? So if you have a big project coming up where you need to start a new workload, you know that there's a solutions architect that I can possibly invite to my project, and we can, whiteboard a couple of approaches of how we want to do that and get the feedback from the solutions architect.
Yeah, and other thing I was the other day it was at a meeting in Berlin. I joined remotely, and I was talking about trends for 2025. And one thing that I want to mention when I was drafting the presentation is that there is, and what you mentioned about certifications is that there are specialties more or less in every pillar that from the well-architected framework. So there is networking, there is security, all this stuff. Do you think it should be, or it should happen in the near future, that there is a certification of a specialty in cost optimization and in sustainability? Because it seems like there are two topics that are, forgotten in that area, and I think it's super interesting that the providers could give a certification on that.
You actually touch on a really important point, right? In a sense, yes, those certifications are required. And interesting story, I actually worked with AWS on a cloud financial management certification. However, because it would directly compete with the FinOps Foundation, it was decided that not to proceed to offer this. Right? Because you can get a FinOps practitioner or FinOps engineer certification from the FinOps Foundation. And around sustainability, maybe there is something similar, right? Similar organizations where you can get sustainability certifications. Hopefully they are technical enough for the specific cloud vendors, right? A sustainability certification for AWS will look different from GCP and from Azure. But overall, I think, yes, that is important. At some point, I also have a thought where cost and sustainability there's a lot of synergies between the two, right?
Yeah.
If you are optimizing for sustainability, you also often optimize for cost. Region specific, right? If you move something to a more sustainable region, maybe it's also cheaper at that point, right? And there's a lot of synergies. However, at the foundation, I don't see these merging. Rather the foundation may offer a sustainability certification, but I'm sure that there is many other organizations that already offer something like that. So it wouldn't make sense to compete with it.
No, that's super. I think I wanted to know the thoughts because when I was drafting this, I was come to my mind like, yeah, why there isn't there are these 4 pillar or well, these 6 pillars, and there are only I think 3, 4. I don't recall the number of specialties now. There are a huge amount of them, and now with AI even more. But yeah, that's really insightful. I think people will know now the reason behind it definitely.
Yeah, I think that everybody actually thought about it. I when I finished one of the first, I think was in AWS, one of my first, I asked the same. Why don't you have a badge for a? But I didn't get so deep. I never, I didn't know the answer back in those time. But yeah, well, I guess that we are now now that we are in Christmas time. It's a good question for you, Vito, to tell us what do you think or what do you wish or what do you think will happen next year in the FinOps? What do you see what will develop? How do you see FinOps developing next year?
I mean, FinOps, let me actually look this up because we have a roadmap. So I can tell you exactly what the focus will be. So implementing Focus. Focus is the cloud agnostic billing format, right? So that's going to be one of the things that next year we are going to focus on. FinOps scopes. So scope could be FinOps for the data center, FinOps for the cloud, FinOps for SaaS, FinOps for AI, those kind of things. Cloud sustainability is another focus. FinOps for AI, we are actually thinking of a certification for that as well. Then FinOps aware product decisions. So this is all about shifting left, right? Before you design your solution, start thinking about cost. So cost on the timeline is being positioned early on at the beginning of the design, not like once the design is done, you try to make it cost efficient, right? And the last of the 6 items that we are going to focus on is the public sector. There is a lot of cloud usage in the public sector. All the schools, all the libraries, every city, every county, and every state, and then the federal government with its military, right? They're all using cloud. And there are some restrictions, like, for example, the budget is approved on an annual basis. So you get like X amount of million budget, right? However, when you buy a reservation, you make a commitment for 3 years. So now you are unable to buy these reservations because technically you don't know what your budget will look like in year 2 and year 3.
That's super interesting, and thanks for the insight on the roadmap. Yeah, definitely public sector is. I'm seeing from the subscription base that there are a lot of people from universities, schools, and counties, which surprised me at the beginning. But definitely, when I started to dig deep into the news as well, there was a contract from a large consulting company with I believe it was the Air Force of the US. So, and also I've seen several things about the US strategy was one of the numbers, and the Home Department of the UK as well. They are starting working on the FinOps. So yeah, definitely interesting things on the public sector as well.
Public sector and big companies as well. All products are very strict with yearly budgets. I think they have the same issues. And it is very interesting. Thank you for sharing with us.
Absolutely,
yeah. Again, for me, it was very insightful, and Dieter, was a pleasure to have you here with us. Looking forward to see you again in the future, sharing with us more ideas and stories and roadmap. And again, I hope you had a good time.
Absolutely. And thanks for inviting me, and happy to talk again.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Dieter. We will leave all the links regarding your, your website and everything that you do on the description of the podcast. And we hope we could have a future episode in 2025 for sure.
Of course, looking forward to it.
Okay. So then, both of you have a happy new year because we are on the dates, and see you next time.
All right, take care.